In this lesson, we are going to go through an actual passage. We're going to dissect it, but we're not going to dissect it just because it's helpful to know about this passage, but because I want to show you a method about how to approach reading comprehension in general. And really, if I have to put an umbrella term over this approach, I'm going to call it active reading. For now, though, let's focus on what's important in dissecting the passage, and that is understanding and noticing these structure words. Structure words are words like however, though, and although. Those are contrast structure words. And other important ones like therefore, or because, which show causality, or words like furthermore or moreover that show intensifiers, or that you are stressing something that comes after that. Now, you don't have to know the exact breakdown of those different words, but in the very first lesson video, I have all the different kinds of structure words laid out, so you can quickly just look at that list and pause it during the video. But really the key is to notice when there are structure words that show contrast and to pay attention to what's happening in the passage after those structure contrast words. What's the tie-in, I suppose, between the structure words, between dissecting the passage and active reading, is what I call mental snapshots. So let me actually take a moment to talk about these mental snapshots. So when we are reading passages, we want to be internalizing what we're reading, but just certain parts. And a good way of thinking about it is you want to be able to take away the meaning from each paragraph. And to do so, of course, you have to notice the connection between sentences, the structure words. But understanding what each paragraph is saying in a few words is what a mental snapshot is. Now, many people substitute shorthand or note-taking for mental snapshots. But I don't encourage taking notes at least once you have spent some time practicing with the reading comp section. Your goal should be to take these mental snapshots. In other words, you are saying, aha, this second paragraph is talking about these two things. Now I'm going to give you a far more specific example of that when we actually go through a passage here in the Dissecting the Passage lesson, where we will take these mental snapshots. But now let's talk exactly about what I mean by active reading. It's come up a couple of times, and essentially it's this idea of taking active snapshots, of not trying to absorb every word or string word after word, hoping meaning will emerge that way. It's, of course, noticing structure words to show how they contribute to the general meaning of the paragraph. And then again, that goes back to the mental snapshots. So you'll want to notice the structure words. You'll want to know how both paragraphs and sentences connect to create overall meaning or the primary purpose about the passage. And finally, part of active reading is to get excited about the passage. It's really difficult to read actively if you come in with a ho-hum attitude and think, I'm just going to read this passage and I'm just going to get it. It doesn't happen that way. You have to put on your active reading hat, and part of that is getting excited about the passage. So that said, we are actually going to try an exercise here. In a minute, I'm going to show you a pretty unpleasant passage. It's not insanely difficult, but it does have quite a bit of technical jargon, and theoretically there's some tough things going on, a lot of moving parts, a lot of density. But what I want you to do is I want you to try on your own, based on what I've told you so far, this concept of active reading, of taking mental snapshots based on the important parts of each paragraph. So read a paragraph, write down a mini summary, and then move on to the next paragraph. And what do I mean by mini summary? Something as simple as that. The first paragraph talks about plasticity, and what does that mean? Brain's ability to change and grow. That's really all I want you to do for the paragraphs in this reading passage. And at the very end, I want you to write down what you think the primary purpose of the passage is. That is, why did the author write this passage? To show X, Y, and Z. When you're done with this, we are actually going to do this exact same exercise, but together, and therefore you can compare what you've written to what I have. So let's start. Here's the passage. I am going to pause it in 3 seconds and then move on to another slide. Or sorry, you should pause it in 3 seconds and then move on to another slide, which I will do now, assuming you've paused it and have read everything and have done, of course, the exercise. Next slide, here it is. Again, pause it now, and then we will begin as soon as you've paused it. Okay, I assume you've paused it and that we have gone through and done the exercise. So what I've done here is I've taken each of the paragraphs and I'm going to break it down into little parts here. So first off, what did the paragraph do? Well, it defines some terms. Plasticity, the brain's ability to heal and grow. That's important, but there's more going on. Notice that structure word, contrast word there. However. Why is that important? Well, it talks about how plasticity has been a dominant view for a while. However, yet, another structure contrast word that means the same thing as however, human brains may be even more plastic than had been previously thought. And that's really it. That's what you're trying to get from here. And that's why mental snapshots aren't this really difficult thing that you're trying to digest all of this information. Essentially, in my head, I can say, they're defining plasticity, which means brain can regrow. And the point of this paragraph is that the human brain may be even more plastic than previously thought. When you say that in your head really quickly, it doesn't take long at all. Again, writing down terms is something we're doing right now, but if you feel confident enough to take these mental snapshots already, go ahead and do so and see if that matches up with what I've written here. And of course, we are writing down, via hand, taking a while here to come up with what these paragraphs are about. But again, I encourage you to move beyond this step because yes, it is time consuming. It does take you out of the passage when you're doing an actual GMAT passage. But when you're first trying this process of active reading, mental snapshots can be difficult because you may try to synthesize this information here in the paragraph and you may get a little bit lost. So therefore, it is important to try writing stuff out. That said, let's go on to the second paragraph. The studies found that oligodendrocytes, the cells that form the myelin. So what I've done here is I've broken up the second paragraph into a few parts because we don't want to just talk about the general idea of the second paragraph, but the main parts. So this sentence here is simplified as oligodendrocytes. Now this is of course a technical word. You know it's going to be important to the passage. They define it for us. They don't expect you to know this. And they really don't expect you to be able to pronounce this. So what I do when I see these terrible words is I just use a shorthand. I'm going to call this OD from now on. Because just saying oligodendrocytes in your head obviously takes a while versus OD doesn't. Main detail, OD forms myelin sheath. I do use the shorthand for myelin. Myelin helps brain function. OD do not die in humans, or at least they die very slowly. Whereas in mice and rats, they die. What else? Well, until now, in order to understand the human brain, we've used mice and rat brains, which are clearly, at least as far as OD is concerned, very different. Okay, there's that one sentence from paragraph 2. What comes here? Now comes the next sentence, starting with rather, showing a contrast there. It wasn't this thing, rather it is this thing. And what is this thing? Well, humans barely lose any OD, and rats can't use existing OD to replace myelin. So your notes do not have to be exactly the same as this, but they should be focusing generally on the idea communicated here. Something you may not have in your notes is the function of the sentence, which is really just elaborating on the first sentence. That's fine. You don't actually have to include something like this when you're writing it out or even taking a mental snapshot, but it's good to notice that flow between sentences. Now, the last sentence of paragraph 2, the implication is that the human brain is more prepared for trauma because it can quickly replenish myelin, unlike the brains of rats and mice, which must create entirely new ODs to do so. Again, we're just going to simplify this quickly. Mental snapshot, brain quickly replace myelin, so therefore more prepared. It's a little interesting inference going on here. And the only reason I bring it up is inference questions are very common on the GMAT. And so if you can already start making some of these inferences while you read, you are a step ahead of the game. Though again, this does take a lot of practice. Here the inference is, the ability to quickly replace myelin is related to plasticity. If you can replace it quickly, your brain is more plastic. That's the inference. And now for the entire paragraph simplified, it's that rats need to replace OD, unlike humans, and therefore human brains are more plastic. If you can get just that after reading the paragraph, if that's your mental snapshot, you are already in a very good place because you're understanding the main points. Finally, paragraph 3. Yes, it's usually very complicated. It's the most dense. And again, obviously the context is with the long passages. If you have a shorter passage that consists of just 2 paragraphs, then the second paragraph will typically be the more dense one because it describes why the author disagrees, or to what extent they disagree with the findings, or to what extent someone else disagrees with the findings mentioned in the previous paragraph. So usually, again, complicated, and therefore many questions will come from this third paragraph. And it is often related to the primary purpose, so therefore understanding third paragraph will help you understand why the author wrote the passage in the first place. Okay, there it is. And as I said, that is pretty intimidating and pretty horrible. I apologize, but I think by understanding and working with this passage, we are, of course, going to be able to handle much of what the GMAT can throw at us. What I've done here, though, is I have bold-faced the structure words, such as moreover, for instance, additionally, nonetheless, and underlined what are some important parts. Now, we, of course, are focused on taking these mini snapshots, so we have here these two big ideas, two long chunks of text, but we're just going to simplify it to plasticity can be defined by other factors besides ODs, and that can be the ability of brain to use both hemispheres. That's really all that's going on here. So all of this text condensed into this wonderful little snapshot. So again, compare this to what you've written down, see how similar it is. And if you wrote down twice as much as this, see if you can kind of condense it a little bit. And a little piece here I should also mention is the supporting evidence is the stroke victim. So it's important when they mention this because this can often come back in a question, not necessarily as the right answer, but knowing that they're mentioning strokes for a reason as evidence. And now we're going to simplify this text right here, and we are finding the connection between OD and the speed of regeneration. That is essentially what's going on here. Notice the nonetheless is a little bit more. OD might play a part in how both hemispheres are used, so it makes it hard to figure out how much plasticity is separate of OD. And that's kind of the big idea. It's not the primary purpose, but it's one of the big ideas at the end here relating to OD, plasticity, and the idea of both hemispheres. But what is the primary purpose now that we've gotten here? Well, one of the purposes is obviously to talk about how important it is in trying to understand the human brain to actually use the human brain to arrive at hypotheses. The specific case, in terms of plasticity, the brain is very different from the mice brain. It has something to do with the ODs, and the primary purpose of the passage is to make the connection between ODs and plasticity and to account for other parts of the brain, such as using both hemispheres, that may also feed into that plasticity. And there we have it. We've gone through that really long passage. We've taken the mental snapshots. And once you become more adept at this, you will be able to move through this more quickly. Again, this may seem very long, but it is a process, and you need to apply it. You need to practice. You'll become smoother at it. And then when you get to the questions, you will save a lot of time from floundering around the answer choices and going back and forth between them.